You want to know how I bulldozed a $6 million Hamptons mansion into the Atlantic with a stolen Prada gown and a hymn on my lips? Simple. I found out I was the real heir 30 seconds before they tried to have me killed. 6 weeks earlier, I was scrubbing bacon grease off a skillet when the devil walked into Pete's diner and offered me $200,000 to pretend to be his daughter. The skillet was still hot enough to hiss when I dropped it into the sink. Steam billowed up around my face, and I squinted through it at the man who had just pushed through the door like he owned the place. He didn't belong. That was the first thing my brain registered. Pete's diner had cracked red vinyl booths, a jukebox that only played Patsy Cline, and a ceiling fan that wobbled on every third rotation. This man wore a cashmere overcoat that cost more than my car. His shoes made no sound on the linoleum, which meant they were the kind of soft leather that had never once slipped in a puddle of fryer oil. He stood there, scanning the empty counter, the empty booths, the empty everything. It was 3 in the afternoon, the dead zone between lunch and the early bird seniors. I was the only one in the front. Pete was out back having a cigarette and cursing the price of potatoes. I wiped my hands on my apron. The calluses on my thumbs scraped against the damp cotton, a sensation that always brought me back to earth. "We're not serving dinner for another hour," I said. He looked at me. Not through me, not past me. At me. Like he was reading the fine print on a contract I didn't know I'd signed. His eyes were pale gray, the color of dishwater after a busy shift. "You're Margaret Cole," he said. It wasn't a question. My full name, the one on my birth certificate, the one I never used because it sounded like a woman who owned a flower shop and not a woman who scraped egg yolk off plates for $9 an hour. I hadn't been Margaret Cole since I aged out of foster care. "Maggie," I corrected. "And you are?" "Harrison Blackwood." The name hit me somewhere in the gut. Everyone in the state knew Blackwood. Blackwood Financial. Blackwood Philanthropies. The Blackwood family and their Hamptons compound and their charity balls and their picture in the society pages every time one of them sneezed. What on God's green earth was Harrison Blackwood doing in a diner that still had a cigarette machine from 1987? I crossed my arms. My left thumb found the callus on my right palm and started rubbing. "You lost, Mr. Blackwood?" No, he pulled out a stool and sat down at the counter. The vinyl squeaked under him. "I have a business proposition for you, Margaret." "Maggie." "Maggie." He said it like he was testing the weight of it. "I need you to pretend to be my daughter for 6 weeks. I will pay you $200,000. The ceiling fan wobbled. Patsy Cline hit a high note. I waited for the punchline, but his face stayed as flat as a griddle. I laughed. It was the kind of laugh that comes out when you've been awake since 4 in the morning, your back is screaming, and a billionaire walks in and asks you to play pretend. "Okay," I said. "And after that, you want me to fly to the moon on a spatula?" He didn't smile. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He slid it across the counter. It was a cashier's check. $200,000. Made out to Margaret Cole. The bank logo was embossed and everything. My fingers went cold. The way they did when the winter pipes burst at 3 in the morning and nobody was coming to fix them. I stared at that check, at all those zeros, and the first thing I saw wasn't a new car or a new house. It was my daughter Emma's face. The way she looked when the doctor said surgery and my insurance said deductible. "Why me?" My voice came out raspier than I intended. "Because you look like someone I knew a long time ago. And because you have no one." He said it without cruelty, just a fact. No family to ask questions. No social media presence. No paper trail that leads anywhere interesting. "You're invisible, Margaret." I need invisible. I should have been insulted. Part of me was. But another part, the part that had spent 20 years scrubbing other people's messes, felt something else entirely. Opportunity. Reckless, stupid, dangerous opportunity. "My daughter has a heart condition," I said. "She needs surgery." That's the only reason I'm even listening to this. I know. Of course he knew. He'd probably had me investigated before he walked through that door. The thought should have scared me. It didn't. Desperation does strange things to a person's fear receptors. What do I have to do? I asked. Move into my estate. Attend family dinners. Wear the clothes they give you. Be insolent, be difficult, be exactly what they expect a long-lost illegitimate daughter to be. And in 6 weeks, you disappear with your money and we never see each other again. Why? What's the catch? For the first time, something flickered behind his eyes. Not warmth. Not quite. But something tired. Something that had been fighting for a very long time. My family is trying to have me declared incompetent. They want my company, my money, my legacy. I intend to throw a very large wrench into their plans. You're the wrench. I looked at the check again. Emma's face. The surgery. The life we could have if I just swallowed my pride and said yes. 2 conditions, I said. You pay half up front. And if anyone in your family lays a hand on me, I walk and keep the money. His mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Agreed. We shook on it. His palm was dry and cool. Mine was still damp from the dishwater and rough as sandpaper. He didn't flinch. The next morning, I packed a single duffel bag, kissed Emma's forehead while she slept at my sister-in-law's house, and got into a black sedan that smelled like new leather and old secrets. Pete watched me go from the diner doorway, a cigarette dangling from his lips. You finally lost your mind, Megs, he called out. Probably, I said. But I'm getting paid for it. The Blackwood estate sat on a stretch of Hamptons coastline that looked like it had been airlifted straight out of a magazine spread. White columns. Manicured hedges. A fountain with a stone horse that looked more expensive than my entire town. I stepped out of the sedan and immediately felt underdressed in my cleanest jeans and the blouse I'd bought at a thrift store for job interviews I never got. A woman was waiting on the front steps. She was tall, blonde, and polished to a high shine. Her blouse was silk. Her skirt was tailored. Her smile was about as warm as a freezer door. You must be the decoy, she said. Cynthia Blackwood. The stepmother. I recognized her from the society pages. In person, she looked younger and meaner, the way a polished knife always looks sharper than a rusty one. And you must be the reason he hired me, I shot back. Her smile didn't waver, but something behind her eyes flicked off. Like a light switch. She turned and walked inside without another word. I followed. The foyer was larger than my entire apartment. A chandelier hung overhead, dripping crystals. A grand staircase curved upward like a promise. And standing at the bottom of that staircase was a young man with a smirk that needed to be slapped off his face. The dishwasher arrives, he said, looking me up and down. I'm Trent. The son who actually belongs here. Try not to steal the silverware. I rubbed my calluses together. Try not to bore me. We'll see who succeeds first. His smirk twitched. His hand went to his collar, adjusting it like it was suddenly too tight. That little gesture would become very familiar to me over the next few days. A man in a gray suit appeared from a side door. Thin. Balding. Eyes like a lizard sizing up a fly. Mr. Aldridge, Cynthia said. The family attorney. He'll be handling the legal formalities. Aldridge didn't offer his hand. He just nodded once, a slow, reptilian dip of the head. Miss Cole. We've prepared a room for you. The staff will show you the way. Dinner is at 7. Don't be late. The room they gave me was a closet with a bed in it. Literally. It was a servant's quarters, tucked behind the kitchen, with a single narrow window that looked out at the trash bins. The sheets were clean but threadbare. The pillow was flat. Someone had placed a single wilting flower in a vase on the nightstand, and the pettiness of that gesture almost made me laugh. I unpacked my duffel bag. My hands were shaking, but I wasn't going to let them see that. I pulled out the one nice thing I owned, a silver locket with Emma's picture inside. I kissed it once and tucked it under my shirt. The housekeeper arrived at 6:30 to escort me to dinner. She was an older black woman with steady hands and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. Her name tag said Ruth. "This way, miss," she said. But before we left, she paused. She looked at me, really looked, and something shifted in her expression. Her lips parted. Her brow furrowed. For 3 full seconds, she just stared. "Is something wrong?" I asked. The pause stretched. 1 beat. 2 beats. 3. Then she blinked and the moment was gone. "No, miss. Just thought you looked like someone. Follow me, please." Dinner was a battlefield disguised as a meal. The dining room was all dark wood and candlelight, a table long enough to land a plane on. Harrison sat at the head, looking pale and tired. Cynthia sat at the opposite end, a queen on her throne. Trent lounged in the middle, swirling wine he was too young to appreciate. Aldridge was there too, a vulture waiting for the main course to die. And at my place setting, right on the gold-rimmed plate, was a single slice of stale bread and a bowl of soup that had gone cold and congealed. The fat had separated on top, forming a greasy skin. "Oh dear," Cynthia said, not sounding dear at all. "The kitchen must have made a mistake. That's the staff meal." "I do apologize." Trent snorted into his wine. I sat down. I looked at the cold soup. I looked at the stale bread. And then I looked at the bottle of wine on the table. It was open, half-poured, the label facing me. Chateau Margaux. A very expensive bottle. Except the label was slightly crooked, and the glass had a tiny bubble in it, the kind you only see in cheap knockoffs. I'd washed dishes at a vineyard in Napa during one of my darker years. The winemaker there had taught me how to spot a forgery. He said it was the only skill he had left after his wife took everything. I picked up the bottle. Swirled it. Sniffed. The nose was all wrong, too sweet, too thin. "Interesting," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're serving a $30 counterfeit at a table that probably cost more than my hospital bills. And you're donating the authentic bottles to the church charity auction next week, aren't you? The one with the silent bidding?" I set the bottle down gently. I wonder what the IRS would say about a tax write-off on fraudulently appraised wine. The silence that followed was so thick you could have served it on a plate. Trent's hand froze on his glass. Cynthia's smile finally cracked, just a hairline fracture at the corner of her mouth. Aldridge's lizard eyes narrowed into slits. At the head of the table, Harrison Blackwood watched all of it. And for the first time since I'd met him, something that looked dangerously close to pride flickered across his face. At the far end of the room, near the kitchen door, Ruth the housekeeper stood perfectly still. She was watching me again. And this time, she gave the tiniest nod. Barely perceptible. But it was there. I didn't know what it meant. Not yet. The days that followed were a parade of petty cruelties and rapid counterstrikes. Cynthia took me to the country club for lunch, ostensibly to teach me manners, and spent the first 10 minutes loudly critiquing my outfit in front of a table of her friends. I let her finish. I let her friends titter. Then I reached into my purse, pulled out a folded bank statement I'd found in her study that morning. She really should have locked her drawers, and said, just as loudly, "Cynthia, honey, if you're having trouble with your credit card debt, I know a good financial counselor. Maxing out 6 visas must be so stressful." The tittering stopped. Cynthia's face went the color of a boiled lobster. One of her friends actually gasped. I took a bite of my salad and smiled with all my teeth. Trent tried to frame me for stealing a diamond bracelet from his girlfriend's guest room. He planted it in my closet, then demanded a full search with all the staff present. I let him make his speech about trust and family honor. I let the search happen. And when the bracelet was found, I simply pulled out my phone and played the recording I'd made that morning, the one where I'd casually mentioned to Ruth, within range of the hidden cameras I'd already found and checked, that I'd seen Trent sneaking into my room. The recording captured him, clear as day, planting the bracelet and muttering about finishing the dishwasher. I didn't even have to say anything. I just played the audio at the breakfast table. Harrison listened. Trent's collar suddenly needed a lot of adjusting. His face went pale. Cynthia started smoothing her blouse cuffs obsessively, a lie brewing behind her tongue. "You bugged your own room?" Trent sputtered. "I learned from the best," I said, glancing at Aldridge. "Your lawyer's office has more wires than a telephone pole." That one was a bluff. But the way Aldridge's jaw tightened told me I wasn't far off. Every night, I called Emma. I listened to her breathing on the other end of the line, steady and strong for now, and I remembered why I was doing this. The money was already in my account. The surgery was scheduled. But something kept me there, something beyond the cash. Maybe it was the way Harrison looked at me across the dinner table, like he was searching for someone he'd lost. Maybe it was the locked drawer in his study that I'd tried twice to open, the one with the brass keyhole that seemed to stare back at me. Maybe it was the photograph on his desk, a woman with dark hair and a crooked smile, a woman who looked so much like me that my hands had trembled when I first saw it. Ruth caught me looking at that photograph one afternoon. I hadn't heard her approach. She moved like a ghost through that house, collecting secrets as easily as dust. "That's Rosemarie," she said, her voice soft. "She died a long time ago." "Who was she?" The 3-second pause. I had started to notice it, that deliberate silence before Ruth answered a direct question. It was like she was weighing each word on a scale, deciding what I deserved to know. "She was the love of his life," Ruth finally said. "He never got over her. The family made sure of that." She turned and walked away before I could ask what she meant. The church potluck happened on a Sunday. The Blackwood family always made a show of attending, smiling for the congregation, dropping large checks into the offering plate. It was a performance, and everyone in that little white clapboard church knew it. But they came anyway, because the Blackwoods funded the roof repairs and the youth group and the Christmas pageant. Money bought a lot of forgiveness. The basement fellowship hall was packed. Folding tables sagged under casseroles and Jell-O salads and deviled eggs that had been arranged with competitive precision. The air smelled like coffee and floor wax and a dozen competing perfumes. Someone had hung a banner that said "Bless this food and those who share it." I was loading my plate with fried chicken when Trent's voice cut through the chatter. "Everyone, can I have your attention?" He was standing near the podium, microphone in hand. His smile was wide and practiced and utterly poisonous. Cynthia stood beside him, one hand resting on his arm like a proud mother lion. Aldridge lurked behind them, his lizard eyes scanning the crowd. "I'd like to address a rumor that's been floating around," Trent said, his voice echoing off the basement walls. "Some of you may have noticed the stranger at our family table these past few weeks. A woman named Maggie. Our father introduced her as a guest. But the truth is far more embarrassing." He paused for effect. The room went quiet. Forks stopped midair. The ceiling fan whirred overhead, wobbling on its axis just like the one at Pete's Diner. "This woman is a fraud," Trent announced. "A dishwasher from some nowhere town who my father hired to pretend to be his long-lost daughter. He's not well, as you know. His judgment has been compromised. And this woman has taken advantage of an old man's confusion to worm her way into our home and our fortune. She is a gold digger. A con artist. A thief." The silence shattered into whispers. I felt every pair of eyes in that room land on me. My face burned. My fingers went cold. I could feel the calluses on my palms rubbing against the paper plate I was holding, and that sensation, that familiar scrape of rough skin, anchored me to the earth. I set the plate down. I walked toward the podium. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my teeth, but my steps were steady. The crowd parted from me like the Red Sea. Trent smirked. Do you have something to say for yourself? I reached the microphone. I turned to face the congregation. And I smiled. It was the same smile I'd given Cynthia at the country club, the one that meant I was about to detonate something. Trent Blackwood, I said, my voice clear and calm, has spent the last 3 months embezzling from his own family's charitable foundation. He's been skimming from the donations you all gave to feed hungry children and fix the church roof. And he's been hiding it in an offshore account under his dog's name. The whispers exploded into gasps. Trent's face went white. That's a lie. Is it? I pulled a folded document from my pocket, the same document I'd found in Harrison's unlocked desk drawer while looking for a pen. The one that detailed a series of suspicious transfers from the foundation to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. I'd spent 3 nights cross-referencing the numbers with public tax records. You'd be amazed what you can learn on a library computer when you can't sleep. The account was opened last February, I said, unfolding the paper. The routing number leads to a bank that doesn't report to the IRS. And the password, Trent? It's your childhood pet's name followed by the year you flunked out of business school. You really should have picked a smarter dog. Trent lunged for the microphone, but his foot caught on the podium cord. He stumbled, grabbed at the punch bowl for balance, and went down in a spectacular cascade of crystal and crimson liquid. The fruit punch soaked through his white shirt, staining him from neck to waist. Someone screamed. Someone else laughed, a shocked, involuntary bark of amusement. The pastor's wife dropped her plate of deviled eggs. Cynthia smoothed her blouse cuffs with frantic, jerky movements. Her mouth opened and closed, but no scripture came out this time. Aldridge was already backing toward the exit, his phone pressed to his ear. And then a different sound cut through the chaos. A heavy thud. The clatter of a chair tipping over. I turned. Harrison Blackwood was on the floor. His face was slack. His eyes were open but unseeing. One hand was clutched to his chest, the other reaching for something that wasn't there. Dad. The word ripped out of me before I could stop it. I didn't know why I said it. He wasn't my father. He was just an old man who'd paid me to be a nuisance. But I said it. And I meant it. The paramedics came. The sirens wailed. The congregation spilled out onto the church lawn, praying and gossiping in equal measure. I rode in the ambulance because no one else did. Cynthia was too busy managing the optics. Trent was too busy trying to rinse the punch out of his shirt. Aldridge had vanished entirely. At the hospital, they told me Harrison had suffered a massive stroke. They told me he might not wake up. They told me to call his family. I didn't. Instead, I drove back to the Blackwood estate in the dark, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The house was empty. The staff had been given the night off. My footsteps echoed through the marble foyer as I walked straight to Harrison's study, to the locked drawer with the brass keyhole. I found the key in his coat pocket. The coat he'd been wearing at the church. I'd grabbed it from the floor before the paramedics arrived, because it was cold outside and I thought he might need it. That was all. That was the only reason. The key turned. The drawer slid open. Inside was a manila envelope. Thick. Yellowed with age. My name was written on the front in Harrison's handwriting, Margaret. I opened it with fingers that felt like they belonged to someone else. My calluses caught on the paper. The first thing I saw was a birth certificate. My birth certificate. Mother, Rosemarie Brennan. Father, Harrison James Blackwood. The second thing was a DNA test. Dated 3 weeks before Harrison walked into Pete's Diner. The results were highlighted, 99.9997% probability of paternity. I was not a decoy. I was his daughter. His real daughter. The blood heir to a billion-dollar empire that his family had tried to steal before I even knew my own name. I stared at the paper until the words blurred, my fingers going cold the way they did when the winter pipes burst at 3 in the morning and nobody was coming to fix them. Except this time, someone had come. And I was holding the only key that mattered. The machines were beeping a slow, metallic lullaby when I finally reached the hospital the next morning. Harrison lay in a private room on the 5th floor, tubes snaking from his arms, his face slack and gray against the white pillow. The stroke had carved away something essential from him, leaving behind a shell that breathed but didn't wake. I stood in the doorway for a long time, the manila envelope pressed against my chest like a shield. I was his daughter. His blood. The DNA test said so, and DNA doesn't lie the way people do. I pulled a chair to his bedside. The vinyl squeaked, the same sound the counter stools made at Pete's Diner. My thumb found the calluses on my palm and started rubbing, the familiar scrape grounding me in a world that had just tilted sideways. "You knew," I said to his motionless face. "You knew before you walked into that diner. You tested me without my permission, and then you hired me to pretend to be what I actually am. What kind of man does that?" He didn't answer. His eyelids didn't flutter. The machines kept beeping. I wanted to be furious. Part of me was. But another part, the part that had grown up in foster homes wondering why nobody wanted her, felt something else entirely. He came for me. After 40 years, he came for me. Even if he did it sideways and backward and through a lie wrapped in a business proposition. "Okay," I whispered. "You rest. I'll handle the wolves." The wolves were already circling. I heard them before I saw them. Cynthia's voice, sharp and precise, cutting through the hospital corridor like a scalpel. She was talking to Aldridge, their words bouncing off the sterile walls. "Power of attorney is already drafted," Aldridge was saying. "With him incapacitated, the board will have no choice. We file the motion tomorrow." "And the dishwasher?" Cynthia asked. That word. Dishwasher. Like it was a disease. "She'll be gone by noon. I've arranged a little surprise." I slipped into the supply closet before they rounded the corner. Through the slatted door, I watched them pause outside Harrison's room. Cynthia smoothed her blouse cuffs. Aldridge checked his phone. Neither of them went in. Neither of them looked at the old man through the glass. They just kept walking. I waited until their footsteps faded. Then I kissed my fingers and pressed them to Harrison's door. "I'll be back," I said. "Don't you dare die before I get to yell at you properly." The police were waiting for me in the hospital lobby. 2 officers, one young and nervous, one old and tired. The young one did the talking. "Margaret Cole, you're under arrest for elder abuse and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult." The words didn't make sense for a moment. They hung in the air like a foreign language. Elder abuse. Financial exploitation. I had been in that house for 3 weeks. I had done nothing but deflect their attacks and try to survive. "Cynthia," I said. It wasn't a question. The old officer's eyes flickered with something that might have been sympathy. "Ma'am, please come with us." They cuffed my hands in front of me. The metal was cold against my calluses. As they walked me out, I passed a trash can near the entrance. And there, stuffed among the fast food wrappers and coffee cups, was a glossy photograph. My booking photo. Someone had already printed it and thrown it away. They put me in a holding cell at the county jail. The bench was cold metal. The walls were cinderblock painted beige. The toilet had no seat. Somewhere down the hall, a woman was singing a hymn off-key, her voice echoing through the bars like a ghost that had given up on haunting properly. I sat on that bench and tried to think. The manila envelope was in my car, which was still parked at the hospital. The DNA test. The birth certificate. Everything that proved who I really was. And I was locked in a cage while the people who wanted me gone were shredding whatever was left of my life. The hours crawled. Lunch came on a plastic tray. I didn't eat it. Dinner came. Same tray, different color sludge. I stared at the cinderblock wall and thought about Emma. Her surgery was in 4 days. I was supposed to be with her, holding her hand, telling her everything would be okay. Instead, I was wearing an orange jumpsuit and waiting for a bail hearing that might not come. Near midnight, the cell door clanged open. A guard I hadn't seen before gestured at me. "Visitor." I shuffled out, wrists still cuffed, expecting a lawyer. A public defender with tired eyes and too many cases. Someone who would tell me I was in deep trouble and should probably take whatever plea deal they offered. But the woman waiting in the visiting room was Ruth. She sat behind the glass partition in a simple navy dress, her hands folded on the counter. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Her eyes were red-rimmed but steady. "Miss Maggie," she said, her voice crackling through the phone receiver. "They didn't hurt you?" "Just my dignity." I tried to smile. It came out lopsided. "Ruth, what are you doing here?" The pause. 1 beat. 2 beats. 3. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope of her own. It was older than the one in my car, yellowed and worn at the edges, held together with string instead of a clasp. "I've been waiting 30 years to show someone this," she said. "I just never knew it would be you." She opened the envelope and pressed the contents against the glass. Love letters. Dozens of them, written in a handwriting I now recognized as Harrison's. All addressed to Rosemarie. All dated the year before I was born. "He loved her," Ruth said. "More than I've ever seen a man love anyone. But she was the housekeeper's daughter, and his family wouldn't allow it. Old Mr. Blackwood, Harrison's father, told him he'd disinherit him if he married beneath his station. And Harrison was weak back then. Young and weak and scared of losing everything." She pulled out another document. This one was typed, notarized, stamped with an official seal. "This is the sworn affidavit of Dr. Marcus Webb, the obstetrician who delivered you. He admitted, on his deathbed, that Cynthia and Aldridge paid him to falsify the birth records. They told your mother you were stillborn. They told the world you never existed. Then they paid a nurse to take you to a foster home 3 counties away and never speak of it again." The room tilted. The cinderblock walls blurred. I gripped the phone receiver so hard my knuckles went white. "My mother," I said, and my voice cracked on the word mother, a word I had never used for anyone real. "She thought I was dead?" Ruth nodded. "Rosemarie died 6 months later. The death certificate says pneumonia. I say it was a broken heart. She never stopped looking for you, Miss Maggie. Even when they told her there was no baby to find." I pressed my forehead against the glass. It was cool against my skin. The way the winter pipes felt at 3 in the morning when nobody was coming to fix them. Except this time, someone had come. Ruth had been there all along, waiting in the shadows, holding the truth in a shoebox under her floorboards. "Why didn't you tell someone?" I asked. "The police? A lawyer? Anyone? Who would believe a black housekeeper against the Blackwood family in 1986? Ruth's voice was tired but not bitter. "I had children of my own to feed. A job I couldn't lose. And I didn't have all the proof yet. It took me years to track down Dr. Webb. Years more to get him to sign that paper. By then, you'd aged out of the system and disappeared. I didn't know where you were until the day you walked into that house." The guard knocked on the door. Visiting hours were over. "One more thing," Ruth said quickly. "The family is filing a motion tomorrow to take full conservatorship of Harrison's estate. If they win, everything is theirs. His company. His money. The house. And they'll make sure you never see the inside of a courtroom. They have a judge in their pocket. You need a lawyer who isn't afraid of them." "I don't know any lawyers who aren't afraid of billionaires," I said. Ruth smiled. It was the first real smile I'd ever seen on her face. "You do now." "My nephew, Marcus Webb Jr. Yes, that Marcus Webb. The son of the doctor who delivered you. He's been waiting his whole life to make this right." The guard opened the door. Ruth gathered her envelope and stood up. Ruth, I said, just before she walked away. Why did you stay? At that house, with those people, for 30 years? She paused. 3 beats. Because I made a promise to your mother the night you were born. I told her I'd watch over you, even if she couldn't. And I'm a woman who keeps her promises. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on that cold metal bench and replayed every interaction I'd had with Ruth since I arrived at the estate. The way she stared at me that first evening. The tiny nod at the dinner table. The warning about Rosemary. She had been signaling me from the start, and I had been too blind to see it. The next morning, Marcus Webb Jr. walked into the jail like he owned the place. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confidence that came from winning cases nobody thought could be won. He wore a charcoal suit and carried a leather briefcase that had seen better days. Margaret Cole, he said, sliding a business card through the bars. I'm your attorney. The state dropped the charges an hour ago. You're free to go. I blinked. They dropped them? Why? Because I filed a motion to suppress every piece of evidence the prosecution had, on the grounds that it was obtained through fraudulent testimony from Cynthia Blackwood. He smiled, and there was something wolfish in it. Also, I may have mentioned to the district attorney that I have a sworn affidavit from my father implicating Cynthia and Aldridge in a 40-year-old felony. The DA is very interested in that affidavit. He's less interested in pursuing bogus elder abuse charges against the victim of a multi-decade conspiracy. The cell door swung open. I stepped out, still in my orange jumpsuit, still reeling. There's more, Marcus said as we walked toward the exit. The conservatorship hearing is at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Cynthia and Aldridge have been planning it for months. They have a judge, a forged psychological evaluation, and a room full of character witnesses who will swear Harrison was incompetent for years. Can we stop them? He stopped walking. Turned to face me. Margaret, you are Harrison Blackwood's biological daughter and sole legal heir. You have a birth certificate, a DNA test, and an affidavit proving criminal conspiracy. You're not just going to stop them. You're going to bury them. I signed my release papers, changed back into my clothes, and walked out of the county jail into a gray afternoon. Ruth was waiting in the parking lot with a thermos of coffee and a change of clothes that didn't smell like jail. You'll need to look presentable for court, she said, handing me a navy blazer. I took the liberty of raiding Cynthia's closet. She won't miss this one. She has 14 others just like it. I laughed. It was the kind of laugh that bubbles up when you've been crying and you don't know why you're laughing, and neither does anyone else. Ruth's eyes crinkled at the corners. We drove to the courthouse in Marcus's battered sedan. The hearing was in the old county courthouse, a stone building with pillars and a clock tower that had stopped working in 1997. A crowd was gathered on the steps. Reporters. Cameras. The Blackwood family scandal had gone public the moment Trent took a header into the punch bowl at the church potluck, and the media had been feasting ever since. Cynthia stood at the top of the steps, resplendent in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my car. She was giving a statement to a row of microphones, her voice trembling with rehearsed grief. My husband is gravely ill, she was saying, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue that was somehow still perfectly folded. And while he fights for his life, certain individuals have chosen to spread vicious lies about our family. We are here today to protect Harrison's legacy from those who would exploit him. Her eyes found me in the crowd. The grief vanished, replaced by something cold and sharp. She smoothed her blouse cuffs, a gesture I now understood. It wasn't just a tell. It was a ritual. She was steadying herself for the lie she was about to tell. The courtroom was packed. Wooden benches. High ceilings. An American flag limp against the wall. The air smelled like old paper and furniture polish and the particular anxiety that only courthouses produce. I sat at the defendant's table with Marcus, even though I wasn't the defendant. It felt like I was. Cynthia sat across the aisle with Trent and Aldridge. Trent's shirt was still faintly stained from the punch bowl incident. He kept adjusting his collar, his fingers twitching at his throat like he was being slowly strangled by an invisible hand. Aldridge was shuffling papers, his lizard eyes darting toward the judge's empty bench. The judge was a woman named Honorable Patricia Morrison. She had iron-gray hair and a face that looked like it had spent decades being unimpressed by rich people's lawyers. Marcus had told me she was fair. Not in anyone's pocket. A small mercy. Cynthia's lawyer spoke first. He was smooth and expensive and used words like fiduciary responsibility and diminished capacity with the casual ease of someone ordering a latte. He presented the forged psychological evaluation. He called a parade of witnesses, business associates, golf partners, a doctor I'd never seen before, who all testified that Harrison had been losing his grip for years. Then Cynthia took the stand. She wore a string of pearls and a mask of dignified sorrow. She spoke about her husband's confusion, his paranoia, his erratic behavior. She mentioned the strange woman he had brought into their home, implying without saying directly that I was a con artist taking advantage of a senile old man. She was good. I had to admit that. By the time she finished, half the courtroom was looking at me like I'd personally climbed through Harrison's window and stolen the silverware. Marcus stood up for cross-examination. He didn't look worried. That made one of us. Mrs. Blackwood, he said, his voice calm and conversational. You testified that your husband's mental decline began approximately 18 months ago. Is that correct? Yes. She smoothed her cuffs. And during those 18 months, you took an increasingly active role in managing the family finances. Is that also correct? I did what any loving wife would do. Marcus nodded. He walked back to his table and picked up a document. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Defense Exhibit A bank records from the Blackwood Charitable Foundation showing a series of wire transfers to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The transfers began 18 months ago. They total $4.7 million. The courtroom buzzed. Cynthia's hand went to her cuff again. Mrs. Blackwood, whose signature is on the authorization forms for these transfers? I don't know what you're talking about. Marcus produced another document. This is a notarized statement from the bank manager. He confirms the signature on every single transfer is yours. Cynthia's face went pale. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Aldridge, who was suddenly very interested in the pattern on the carpet. Your Honor, Marcus continued, we would also like to submit Exhibit B. A sworn affidavit from Dr. Marcus Webb Sr., the obstetrician who delivered Margaret Cole. In it, he confesses to falsifying birth records at the request of Cynthia Blackwood and Harold Aldridge, in order to conceal the birth of Harrison Blackwood's biological daughter. The buzz became a roar. The judge banged her gavel. Order. Furthermore, Marcus said, raising his voice over the noise, we have DNA evidence proving that Margaret Cole is Harrison Blackwood's daughter and sole heir. We have love letters documenting Harrison's relationship with Rosemarie Brennan, the plaintiff's mother. And we have testimony from Ruth Johnson, a household employee of 30 years, who can confirm every detail of the conspiracy to hide this child's existence and defraud her of her inheritance. I turned to look at Ruth. She was sitting in the back row, her hands folded, her face calm. She caught my eye and gave the tiniest nod. Cynthia's composed mask shattered. This is absurd, she shouted. These documents are forgeries. This woman is a dishwasher. A nobody. She doesn't belong here. The judge's gavel came down again. Mrs. Blackwood, control yourself. But Cynthia couldn't control herself. The years of scheming, the decades of lies, were crumbling around her. And in front of a room full of reporters. She was supposed to disappear. Cynthia shrieked, pointing at me. That was the plan. She was never supposed to exist. The courtroom went completely silent. It's a strange thing, hearing someone confess in public. The words hang in the air like smoke, and everyone breathes them in at the same moment. Cynthia's hand flew to her mouth, but it was too late. The reporters were scribbling. The cameras were rolling. Aldridge had gone the color of old milk. Marcus turned to the judge with the calm expression of a man who had just won everything. Your Honor, I move that the conservatorship petition be dismissed with prejudice, and that the court recognize Margaret Cole as Harrison Blackwood's legal daughter and rightful heir. Judge Morrison removed her glasses. She looked at Cynthia. She looked at Aldridge. She looked at Trent, who seemed to be trying to disappear into his collar. Motion granted, she said. The gavel came down one final time. I stood in the courthouse hallway an hour later, my back against the cold stone wall, trying to remember how to breathe. Reporters swarmed past me, chasing Cynthia and Trent and Aldridge toward the exits. Ruth appeared at my elbow with a cup of water. Drink this, she said. You're shaking. I drank. The water was lukewarm and tasted faintly of the paper cup, but it was the best thing I'd ever swallowed. What happens now? Now you go see your daughter, Ruth said. Her surgery is in 3 days, isn't it? Emma. I had been so caught up in the chaos that I hadn't called her in nearly 24 hours. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. After that, Ruth continued, we deal with the rest of it. The family won't give up. They'll appeal. They'll try to tie the estate up in probate court for years. They still have resources. They still have connections. I'm not afraid of them. Ruth looked at me with those steady, knowing eyes. You should be. Not terrified, but cautious. Cynthia Blackwood has never lost anything in her life. She doesn't know how. And people who don't know how to lose get very dangerous when they're cornered. She was right. Of course she was right. But standing in that courthouse hallway, with the truth finally exposed and my name finally restored, I felt something I hadn't felt in 40 years. I felt like I belonged somewhere. Marcus drove me back to the hospital. Harrison was still unconscious, still tethered to his machines. But his color was better. Or maybe I was just imagining it because I needed it to be true. I sat beside his bed and took his hand. His fingers were cool and dry, just like they'd been when we shook on that deal at Pete's Diner. Hey, I said. It's me. Your wrench. The machines beeped. I know everything now. About Rosemarie. About what they did. About why you hired me instead of just telling me the truth. I squeezed his hand. You're an idiot, by the way. A complete and total idiot. You could have just said, Maggie, I'm your father, let's go destroy some evil people together. I would have said yes. I would have said yes in a heartbeat. The machines beeped. But I get it. You were scared. You'd already lost her. You didn't want to lose me too before you even had me. My voice cracked. I didn't try to stop it. So here's the deal. You wake up. You fight. And when you're better, we're going to have a very long conversation about 40 years of missed birthdays. Deal? His fingers twitched. Just barely. Just enough. I pressed my forehead to his hand and let the tears come. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if Cynthia would make bail or if Aldridge would flee the country or if Trent would ever get the punch stains out of his shirt. I didn't know if Harrison would wake up or if my daughter would survive her surgery or if I would ever feel like I deserved any of this. But I knew one thing. I was no longer invisible. And the wolves had finally met their match. The warning came 3 days later, scrawled on a napkin and left under my windshield wiper. Withdraw your claim or you'll never see your daughter again. I found it at 6 a.m, standing in the hospital parking garage with a cup of gas station coffee in one hand and my car keys in the other. The napkin was from Pete's Diner. That was the detail that got me. Not the threat itself, I'd been expecting something ugly from Cynthia's camp. But the napkin. Someone had driven all the way upstate to my little nowhere town, walked into the diner where I used to work, and taken a napkin from the dispenser just to prove they could reach anywhere. Anyone. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. I folded the napkin carefully, tucked it into my pocket, and called Marcus from the car. They're getting desperate, I said when he answered. That's good. Desperate people make mistakes. Desperate people also hurt children, Marcus said. His voice was tight. I'm sending a security detail to your daughter's hospital. They'll be there in 20 minutes. Make it 15. Emma was already at the children's hospital upstate, prepped for the surgery that had been scheduled before my entire life imploded. The surgery that Harrison's money was paying for. The surgery that was happening tomorrow morning, no matter what threats came wrapped in diner napkins. I drove straight there. 5 hours on the interstate, my phone buzzing every 20 minutes with updates from Marcus. Cynthia had been released on bail. Aldridge was fighting extradition to somewhere. Trent had given an interview to a tabloid claiming I was a dangerous fraud who had hypnotized his father. The tabloid printed it because tabloids print anything. By the time I reached the hospital, the security detail was already in place. 2 off-duty officers flanking Emma's door like stone lions. I kissed them both on the cheek because I didn't know what else to do, and then I went inside. Emma was sitting up in bed, her dark hair spread across the pillow, her heart monitor beeping a steady rhythm that I had learned to read like music. She was 10 years old. She had my crooked smile and her father's stubborn chin and a heart that had been fighting her since birth. Mom, she said, looking at my face. You look like you haven't slept in 100 years. 99, I said. I'm fine. How are you feeling? Nervous. She picked at the hospital blanket. The nurse said the surgery takes 6 hours. That's a whole school day. You've sat through plenty of school days. This will be easier. They give you the good drugs. She laughed. It was a small laugh, but it was real. I sat on the edge of her bed and took her hand. Her fingers were so small against my calloused palm. I have to tell you something, I said. About your grandfather. Emma's brow furrowed. I don't have a grandfather. You do. His name is Harrison. He's very rich, very stubborn, and very sick right now. But he's going to be okay. And when he wakes up, he's going to want to meet you. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Is he the reason those men are outside my door? Smart kid. Too smart. Yes. There are some people who don't want us to be part of his family. They're not very nice people. But they're going away soon, and we're going to be fine. Promise? I squeezed her hand. I promise. The surgery was at 7 the next morning. I walked Emma to the operating room doors and kissed her forehead and told her I loved her more than all the money in all the banks in all the world. She rolled her eyes at me, which was exactly what I needed her to do. Then the doors closed, and I was alone in the waiting room with nothing but fluorescent lights and a television playing the morning news. The news was about me. The Blackwood scandal had gone national. Some enterprising reporter had dug up my entire history, the foster homes, the diner, the daughter with the heart condition. They'd found the DNA test. They'd found Dr. Webb's affidavit. They'd found Cynthia's courtroom meltdown and played it on a loop between segments about the weather. The headline crawl at the bottom of the screen read, Dishwasher era scandal rocks Wall Street, Blackwood family empire in turmoil. I watched myself become a folk hero in real time. The waiting room television showed a diner in Ohio where the waitstaff had hung a sign, Maggie's Special, today only, free coffee for anyone who's been underestimated. A radio host in Texas called me the Cinderella with a spatula. Someone had started a GoFundMe for my daughter's medical bills, not knowing they'd already been paid. The donations had reached $40,000 before the platform took it down. It was absurd. It was overwhelming. It was the strangest thing that had ever happened to me, and I had just discovered I was the secret heir to a billion-dollar fortune. Marcus called at noon. The gala, he said. It's still happening. The Blackwood Foundation Charity Gala was an annual event. Black tie. Champagne. The wealthiest people in the state packed into a ballroom to congratulate themselves on their generosity. Cynthia had been planning it for months, before everything fell apart. And despite the scandal, despite the criminal charges, despite the fact that the entire world now knew she was a fraud, she had decided to go through with it. She's making her last stand, Marcus said. She's invited every donor, every board member, every reporter who will take her calls. She's going to get on that stage and play the victim. The betrayed wife. The woman who stood by her husband while a scheming outsider tried to tear her family apart. She's going to rewrite the whole story. And half the people in that room will believe her because they want to. Because believing her means their world still makes sense. I thought about the napkin in my pocket. The threat against my daughter. The 40 years of lies that had stolen my mother from me and my inheritance from my future. When is it? I asked. Tomorrow night. 7 o'clock. The Grand Ballroom at the Prescott Hotel. Get me an invitation. Marcus paused. Maggie, if you walk into that room, it's going to be a war. Good, I said. I didn't spend 20 years scrubbing skillets just to run from a woman who can't even match her own cufflinks. Get me the invitation. And call Ruth. Tell her to bring the box. What box? The one under her floorboards. She'll know what I mean. Emma came out of surgery at 2 in the afternoon. The surgeon said everything had gone perfectly. Her heart was strong. Her color was good. She would need rest and medication and follow-up appointments, but she was going to be fine. She was going to live a normal life. I sat beside her bed and watched her sleep. Her chest rose and fell with a steadiness that had never been there before. The machines beeped a calmer rhythm now, a softer song. I pressed my fingers to my lips and then to her forehead. I'll be back tomorrow, I whispered. Mama has to go demolish a family. Ruth met me at the Prescott Hotel at 6:30. She was wearing a navy dress and carrying a shoebox tied with twine. The box was dusty and worn at the corners, the cardboard soft with age. Is everything in there? I asked. Everything, she said. 30 years of receipts. Bank statements. Recorded phone calls. Photographs. And one thing I never showed you. What's that? A letter. From your mother. She wrote it the night before she died. She made me promise to give it to you if I ever found you. The words hit me somewhere deep, somewhere I couldn't reach to rub away the ache. After tonight, I said. I'll read it after tonight. I was wearing my mother's dress. Ruth had found it in a cedar chest in the attic, wrapped in tissue paper, preserved like a relic. Rosemarie had worn it to a summer dance 40 years ago, the night Harrison first told her he loved her. It was cream-colored silk with a fitted waist and a skirt that moved like water. It fit me perfectly. How do I look? I asked Ruth. The 3-second pause. Then her eyes glistened. Like her. Exactly like her. The Grand Ballroom was a cathedral of excess. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling. Ice sculptures glistened on linen-draped tables. A string quartet played something soft and meaningless. The air smelled like expensive perfume and old money and the particular arrogance of people who had never once worried about a medical bill. 200 guests turned to stare when I walked in. I had not come alone. Marcus was on my right, carrying a briefcase full of documents. Ruth was on my left, carrying the shoebox. And behind us, uninvited but undeniable, were 3 reporters from networks that Cynthia had not invited. Cynthia was at the front of the room, standing near the stage. She wore a gown of deep burgundy, the color of old blood. Her pearls were perfectly arranged. Her smile was perfectly practiced. But when she saw me, when she saw the dress I was wearing, that smile cracked at the edges and something feral peeked through. She recognized the dress. Of course she did. Trent was beside her, his collar already looking too tight. Aldridge was conspicuously absent, probably on a plane to somewhere without an extradition treaty. But Cynthia had gathered the rest of her allies, board members, society friends, a pastor who looked uncomfortable being there. I don't recall you being on the guest list, Cynthia said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. I wasn't, I said. But I'm the heir to the Blackwood estate, so I believe that makes this my party now. The whispers started. Cell phones came out. The reporters jostled for position. Cynthia laughed. It was a cold sound, brittle as ice. You have no proof. A few documents, a DNA test that could have been fabricated. You think that's enough to walk into my event and make accusations? I don't make accusations, I said. I tell stories. And tonight, I have a very good one. I nodded to Ruth. She untied the twine on the shoebox. The lid came off with a soft sigh of old cardboard, and the scent of aged paper drifted into the perfumed air. The lights dimmed. Not because I'd planned it, the hotel AV tech had just decided, apparently, that this was the most interesting thing happening in the building. The projector screen behind the stage flickered to life, and Marcus plugged in his laptop. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, walking toward the stage. Cynthia blocked my path for a moment, her eyes burning, but something in my face made her step aside. You've all heard the rumors. You've seen the news. You know that Harrison Blackwood is in the hospital and that his family has been fighting over his fortune. What you don't know is why. I reached the podium. The microphone squealed briefly and then settled. Behind me, the projector screen glowed white. This is a story about a woman named Rosemarie Brennan. She was a housekeeper's daughter. She fell in love with a wealthy man, and he fell in love with her. They had a child together. A daughter. I paused. Me. The first image appeared on the screen. Rosemarie's photograph. The same one from Harrison's desk. Dark hair. Crooked smile. Eyes that looked exactly like mine. Cynthia Blackwood and Harold Aldridge conspired to hide my birth. They paid a doctor to falsify records. They told my mother I was stillborn. They told the world I didn't exist. And then they spent 40 years making sure I never found my way home. The next image. Dr. Webb's sworn affidavit. The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when 200 people are all holding their breath at once. But that's not all they did. The next image. Bank records. Wire transfers. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. They stole from the foundation. $4.7 million, funneled through shell companies and fake charities. Money that was supposed to feed children and build schools and fund medical research. They used it to buy cars and jewelry and vacation homes they never visited. Cynthia's face had gone gray. Her hand was at her cuff, smoothing and smoothing and smoothing. This is absurd. These are forgeries. Everyone knows she's a con artist. Do they? I clicked to the next slide. It was an audio file. This is a recording of a phone call between Cynthia Blackwood and Harold Aldridge, made 3 days ago. The FBI has the original. This is a copy. I pressed play. Cynthia's voice filled the ballroom, sharp and tinny through the speakers. The dishwasher's daughter is the leverage. If she doesn't withdraw the claim, we make the child disappear. I don't care how. I don't care what it costs. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Trent moved first. He tried to edge toward the exit, but the reporters had already blocked the doors. His collar was dark with sweat. His face was the color of the mashed potatoes at the buffet table. That's not me, Cynthia whispered. That's fabricated. That's... The FBI doesn't think so, I said. They arrested Aldridge an hour ago at the airport. He was trying to board a flight to Venezuela with a suitcase full of cash and a fake passport. He's already talking. He told them everything. That was only partially true. Aldridge had been arrested, but we didn't know if he was talking yet. Cynthia didn't need to know that. She swayed on her feet. Her hand reached for Trent, but Trent was too busy trying to escape. He pushed through a cluster of guests, stumbled into the buffet table, and sent the champagne tower crashing to the floor in a spectacular cascade of crystal and foam. Someone screamed. Someone else laughed. The string quartet stopped playing. The pastor, who had looked uncomfortable, stood up and walked out. 3 board members followed him. I stepped away from the podium. I didn't need it anymore. The story was telling itself now, spreading through the room like fire through dry grass. The reporters were already filing their stories. The guests were already taking sides. And Cynthia Blackwood was standing alone in the center of the ballroom, her perfect mask shattered, her empire crumbling around her. "You think you've won," she said, her voice raw and trembling. "You think this changes anything. But you're still a dishwasher. You're still nobody. You'll never belong in this world." I walked toward her. Close enough to see the broken blood vessels in her eyes, the way her foundation was cracking in the fine lines around her mouth. "You're right," I said quietly. "I'm a dishwasher. I've scrubbed grease off skillets and mopped floors and cleaned toilets and scraped gum off the bottom of tables. And you know what that taught me? It taught me that some messes can't be cleaned up with money. Some stains don't come out. What you did to my mother, what you did to me, what you did to your own husband, that doesn't wash off, Cynthia. That stays forever." I turned to face the room. The cameras were rolling. The guests were frozen. The champagne was still dripping off the tablecloth onto the marble floor. "The Blackwood Foundation will be under new management," I announced. "An independent board, selected by a court-appointed trustee. Every penny that was stolen will be returned. Every charity that was defrauded will be made whole. And the Hamptons estate, the mansion that Cynthia spent $3 million renovating with stolen money, will be demolished." That got a reaction. Gasps. Murmurs. A few nervous laughs. "Demolished?" someone asked. "Bulldozed," I said. "Leveled. Turned into a children's hospital. I've already filed the permits. Construction starts next month." Cynthia made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Her knees buckled. She grabbed at a chair, missed, and slid to the floor in a heap of burgundy silk. No one moved to help her. Not the board members. Not the pastor, who had already left. Not her son, who was still dripping champagne near the exit, staring at his phone like it might offer him a way out of this nightmare. I looked at Ruth. She was standing at the back of the room, the shoebox still cradled in her arms. She gave me that tiny nod, the one she'd given me at the dinner table weeks ago. I finally understood what it meant. It meant, keep going. You're almost home. The Prescott Hotel ballroom emptied slowly, like water draining from a sink. The reporters chased their stories. The guests collected their coats and their dignity and their hastily composed statements about how they'd always suspected something was wrong with Cynthia. The string quartet packed up their instruments and disappeared through a service door. By 8 o'clock, only a handful of people remained. Marcus was on his phone with the FBI. Ruth was sitting in a velvet chair, the shoebox on her lap, her eyes closed. And I was standing at the shattered buffet table, eating a cold shrimp from a tray that no one had touched. "Waste not, want not," I said to no one in particular. Marcus hung up his phone. "Aldridge is singing like a choirboy. He's giving them everything. Cynthia, Trent, the offshore accounts, the forged documents. He's trying to cut a deal. Will he get one? Probably not. But his testimony will put Cynthia away for at least 10 years. Trent might get probation if he rolls on his mother." Marcus paused. "Are you okay?" I ate another shrimp. "I don't know. Ask me tomorrow." Ruth opened her eyes. She reached into the shoebox and pulled out an envelope, yellowed and soft, with my name written on the front in a handwriting I didn't recognize. "Your mother's letter," she said. "I think it's time." I took the envelope. My calluses caught on the paper, the same way they'd caught on the DNA test in Harrison's study. I wanted to open it. I also wanted to run away and hide in a diner kitchen and never come out. But I wasn't that person anymore. That person had died the moment I saw my name on a birth certificate with Harrison Blackwood listed as my father. I opened the envelope. My dearest daughter. If you are reading this, it means I am gone and Ruth has found you. I am so sorry I couldn't be there to watch you grow up. I am so sorry I couldn't hold you or sing to you or tell you every day how much you were wanted. They told me you were stillborn. I held you for 3 minutes before they took you away. 3 minutes. I counted every second. Your eyes were closed. Your fingers were curled around my thumb. You were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I knew. In my heart, I knew you were alive. But I was young and poor and no one believed me. They said I was hysterical. They said I needed rest. They said I would forget eventually. I never forgot. Not for one single day. Your father's name is Harrison Blackwood. He is a good man, even if he was too weak to stand up to his family when it mattered. If he ever finds you, give him a chance. He loved me. He will love you too. Be brave, my daughter. Be kind. Be the person I always knew you could be. And when you think of me, don't be sad. Be angry instead. Angry people change the world. All my love, forever and ever. Your mother. Rosemary. I folded the letter carefully and pressed it to my chest. My fingers were cold. My throat was tight. I was not going to cry. I was not going to cry. Ruth put her hand on my shoulder. She would be proud of you. I looked up at the ceiling, at the crystal chandeliers that had witnessed the destruction of a dynasty. Somewhere in the hospital across town, Harrison was waking up. Somewhere in the children's hospital upstate, Emma was breathing with her new, strong heart. And somewhere in a holding cell, Cynthia was learning that some messes really don't wash off. I thought about the opening line of this whole insane story. The confession I'd made to myself in the dark, the promise I'd whispered to the ceiling of my jail cell. You want to know how I bulldozed a $6 million Hamptons mansion into the Atlantic? We hadn't gotten there yet. The permits were filed. The bulldozers were booked. The construction crew was on standby. But the mansion was still standing, empty and hollow and full of ghosts. 3 weeks passed. Harrison came home from the hospital in a wheelchair, his left side still weak but his mind sharp as ever. The first thing he said to me was not "I'm sorry" or "I love you" or any of the things I'd imagined. "The cookbook," he said, his voice slurred but insistent. "Did you save the cookbook from the kitchen?" I blinked. "What cookbook?" "The one with the red cover. The one Rosemary used to make her apple pie. She wrote notes in the margins. It's the only thing in that house that ever mattered. I found it the next day. It was in a drawer in the butler's pantry, buried under a stack of takeout menus Cynthia had collected. The cover was stained with flour and faded with age. Inside, in my mother's handwriting, were notes. Add more cinnamon. Harrison likes it sweet. Don't let the crust get too brown. Patience is the secret ingredient. I brought it to Harrison. He held it in his lap with his one good hand and wept. The day of the demolition arrived cold and bright. The Hamptons mansion stood against the November sky, its white columns gleaming, its fountain frozen into silence. A crowd had gathered to watch. Reporters. Neighbors. A few of the people who had been at the gala, hoping to see the final act of the drama. I was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt and my old work boots from the diner. My dishwashing apron was tied around my waist, cleaned and pressed but still bearing the faint grease stains of 1,000 breakfast shifts. I'd worn it on purpose. A reminder of where I came from. Emma stood beside me, bundled in a coat, her face still pale from surgery but her eyes bright with the particular mischief of a child who had been promised she could push a button that would destroy something. "Is it true that Trent peed his pants when the champagne tower fell?" she asked. "It's possible," I said. The lighting was poor. Harrison was in his wheelchair next to us, a blanket across his lap, the cookbook in his hands. Ruth stood behind him, her steady presence anchoring us all to the earth. The demolition foreman walked over, hard hat in his hands. "Ready when you are, ma'am." I looked at the mansion. The mansion where Cynthia had planned her conspiracies. The mansion where Trent had planted evidence and lied to cameras and adjusted his collar with sweaty fingers. The mansion where my mother's ghost had been locked away for 40 years, waiting for someone to set her free. "Emma," I said. "Do you want to do the honors?" Her eyes went wide. "Really? Really?" The foreman handed her a small remote control with a single red button. She held it in both hands like it was the most precious thing she'd ever touched. "On the count of 3, I said. 1, 2, 3. Emma pressed the button. The charges went off in sequence. The columns crumbled. The walls folded inward. The fountain cracked down the middle, and the stone horse toppled into the rubble. A cloud of dust rose into the November sky, white against the pale blue, and the crowd cheered. I watched it fall. I watched the symbol of everything that had been stolen from me turn into dust and debris. And I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph. Not joy. Something quieter. Something that felt like the first breath after a long underwater swim. Harrison reached for my hand. His grip was weak, but it was there. "She would have loved you," he said. "Rosemary. She would have been so proud." I squeezed his fingers. "I know." Emma tugged at my apron. "Mom, can we get pancakes after this?" I laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd had in weeks, the kind that bubbles up from somewhere deep and surprising. "Sure, baby. We can get pancakes." "With extra syrup?" "With extra everything." We walked away from the rubble, the 4 of us. Harrison in his wheelchair, Ruth pushing him gently. Emma skipping ahead, still clutching the demolition remote like a trophy. And me, bringing up the rear, my dishwashing apron flapping in the cold wind. Behind us, the bulldozers were already moving in, clearing the debris for the children's hospital that would rise in its place. A new beginning. A second chance. Not a fairy tale ending, nothing that tidy. Harrison would probably never walk again. Emma would need medication for the rest of her life. I would carry the scars of 40 lost years for as long as I lived. But some things were finally healing. Some things were finally whole. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the napkin I'd found under my windshield wiper 3 weeks ago. The threat. The warning. The last gasp of a dying empire. I crumpled it in my fist and tossed it into the wind. It tumbled across the frozen grass and disappeared into the dust cloud, just another piece of debris being cleared away. "You know," I said to no one in particular, "I think I'm going to keep the apron." Ruth looked back at me and smiled. "Good," she said. "You never know when you'll need to scrub something clean." The diner was waiting. Pete had offered me my job back, not knowing I was now worth more than the entire town put together. I'd told him I'd think about it. Maybe I would go back. Maybe I would wash dishes for a few more shifts, just to remember what it felt like to hold something ordinary in my hands. Or maybe I would build something new. A foundation. A charity. A restaurant of my own. I didn't know yet. And that was okay. For the first time in 40 years, the future was mine to decide. Emma ran back to me, her cheeks pink with cold. "Mom, hurry up. Grandpa says he's buying and he wants pie." "Pie sounds perfect," I said. And we walked toward the car, toward the diner, toward whatever came next, together.